Okay, well, we'll move on to our final topic, which is one of my favorite topics, but it's one that may not apply to everybody, but it's good to be aware of all the different options in photography. And tilt shift lenses have been a pet project of mine for the last 10 years. I bought my first one, as I say, about 10 years ago, and I've always known about them. I learned about doing tilts and shifts when I was in college using a large view camera. And I always wanted to do a class on tilt shift lenses. And I finally, I had a lot of starts and stops over the years. It's been in production for several years, but I finally finished the class and put that out last October or so. So I do have a very intense, but almost 7 hours in length on tilt shift lenses. And we're just going to go through some of the highlights on the tilting aspect of tilt shift lenses here. So tilt shift lenses are named so for pretty obvious reasons. They're going to be able to tilt. This is to change the plane of focus. You can either maximize or you can minimize the depth of field, so you can have more things in focus or less things in focus. Now, most, but not all of these lenses will also do perspective control, which is a way of shifting the lens up, down, and to the sides. This can be used for correcting perspective when shooting a building at a low angle, for instance. It can also be used very successfully for doing panorama stitching, for creating large megapixel images over a wide area. Now, there are many lenses that will do perspective control that will not do the tilting that we're going to be talking about. So you need to be very clear about what lens you are looking at and what features it has. For the most part, I'm going to be talking about kind of the mainstream Canon and Nikon lenses here as far as what they can do, but there are other brands out there that can work. All right, so in our cameras, we have an imaging plane, we have a lens plane, and then when we focus, we have a focus plane. And with all your normal lenses, your primes and your zooms and your macros and whatever you want, these planes always stay parallel to each other. And as you focus back and forth, that plane of focus moves closer to the camera and further away, and that's all that ever happens. And let's take our apertures out. When we focus with a narrow aperture, 1.4, we're going to get a very narrow band of focus, of course. If we want to get the foreground in focus, well, we've been dealing a lot with this today. We can stop our aperture down. We can move our focus point to that hyperfocal point and get it somewhere between the two. And maybe it reaches and gets enough, but maybe it doesn't quite reach that far. We'll do focus stacking. Well, we've got flowers blowing in the wind and we can't shoot multiple photos to get everything in focus. Well, how do we really get it in truly sharp focus in one shot? Well, if we tilt the lens, it tilts the plane of the lens. And my logic would say, well, the plane of the focus would tilt an equal amount as the lens plane, but that's not what happens. What happens is it tilts quite a bit more. And I'm taking some liberties here with my graphics, so cut me a break. I'm going to get you more exact here in a moment. It changes your depth of field, the angle that you're shooting, and what's in focus, the plane of what is in focus. And now, rather than stopping down to f/22, which has some diffraction, you can stop down to f/8, where your lenses are likely to be much sharper. Now, the actual plane that you're going to get is more of this wedge of focus that's a little bit narrower in the foreground, wider in the background. But if you get it lined up right, you will get the flowers in the foreground, the mountains in the background in perfectly sharp focus. Now, you do have to be aware that you are working with a relatively narrow plane of focus, very specifically lined up with what you want. And if one of those flowers or trees or bushes happens to grow up above it, well, it is going to be out of focus and it might look a little funny. You might like the way that looks or you might not, but be aware that we're talking about a flat plane that we're changing. Now, the available lenses run a pretty wide range, but they're mostly in the wide angle category. We have our ultra wides, probably what I think is the most practical lens for this, which is the 24. We have a normal lens, and then we have a short telephoto, which a lot of people do this with portrait photography. And then Canon introduced a 135 just to have an additional one there. So the ultra wide in my mind is best for architecture work. And so if you're doing interiors, churches, large buildings from the inside, the 17 and 19 is great for that. I find those a little difficult to work with in nature because they're a little bit tougher to filter. And it just requires a bigger area that looks really good. I think 24 is the perfect landscape and travel type lens for tilt shift work. I do have a lot of fun with the 45 and 50 range. If you want just a general purpose lens that can do a lot of different things, I think that's very valuable. When you get into the 85s and 90s, you're talking a little bit more about product photography. That can be very good. And the 135, I think, is just an extension on those 85s and 90s and being in product photography, possibly working more with food and in the studio and in that category. So let's take this out in the field to Mount Rainier National Park. Let's take that lens. We're going to tilt it down. Now, how far do we tilt it down? Well, that is a discussion for my tilt shift class. It goes into way more detail and time than we have here. So there are particulars as to how far you need to tilt it to get the right tilt, to get the foreground subject as well as the background subject in focus. So got a bunch of different images here with different focal lengths. You can see which aperture I'm setting in the upper left-hand corner and what type of movement I am doing with the lens in this case. Most all of these shots are done off of a tripod. They're done with a little bit of setup. This is not real quick, fast acting street photography type stuff. This is going to be a little bit more careful setup, careful examining, adjusting the lenses, shooting a test shot, and playing those images back and magnifying to make sure that you're getting everything set up correctly. And when you get it set up correctly, the focus is so sharp from foreground to background. It is just one of my favorite ways of capturing things in a single shot out in the field. And I've been working with all of these. As I say, I like the 24. I think it's just one of the most practical. I'll bring the 50 around with me if I just want to bring one lens sometimes where I want to shoot with shallow depth of field. And there's a way of reversing the tilt to get shallow depth of field, but that, once again, is a discussion for another time. And what's great about this is that you're shooting at your camera's or your lens's maximum aperture for sharpness. So everything is just going to be as sharp as possible. And so when you get a sharp image like this one here, I printed this up poster size, and it's in the living room of my house. It is really good. It's, medium format quality because we are really getting that focus point set perfectly right. Now, here's a case of vertical video being properly used over on the left. The camera is focused on this petrified log in the foreground, and I'm going to tilt the lens so that I get the background and the rest of the foreground in focus. And you can see this real time in the viewfinder with DSLRs or mirrorless cameras. I've been working with tilt shift lenses, mostly with DSLRs. I like the clear view through the viewfinder is really nice, but they work well on the mirrorless. When you're using an adapter. There is nobody that has made a mirrorless tilt shift lens yet. I'm sure that's going to change here in the near future, but it works well on all of the systems. Now, I will also use the shifting capability to shift to the left, shift to the right with a tilt forward so that I'm getting the focus right. I'm getting two different images that I can put together in a panorama. And this is getting me incredibly sharp information for focus, but also getting me a ton of pixel information. A lot of times I will set up a shot in horizontal with a tilt forward so that everything's in focus from foreground to the background. And then I'll shift to the left, get a shot there, get another shot in the middle, and then another shot over on the right-hand side. And I will end up with a gigantic sharp image, which is a lot of fun to be able to have that much resolution and that much sharpness to work with. Now, using the shift on the lens in a variety of ways, I can shoot 4 images, if you can think of 4 corners of a horizontal image. And I am getting even more pixels. With the tilt, I'm getting the sharp, and I end up with an even larger image that's got a little bit more height to it for another style of panoramic. And so tilt shift lenses, that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to them, but that is why some people use them and swear by them as being so great. And so let's see if there's any questions there on the tilt shift lenses.
We do have a few, John. So firstly, Tom would like to know, how does the tilt work with verticals? Because he thinks that the tilt would go in a horizontal plane. So I don't know if you have a tilt shift lens handy.
Yeah, let me see if I can get back to my regular screen. Just lucky that I have one of these set aside here. So on this particular lens, there is a knob over here, which let's see if I can loosen this up. Oh, wrong. There we go. All right, so we can tilt down here. And then I have on this side, I have a little lever down in here where I can leave the lens in that position and rotate the whole camera, or I can rotate the lens and work it in any direction. So the better of the tilt shift lenses will allow you to independently rotate the lens and shift the lens. Let's get this into a normal position here.
John, I'm not seeing your screen. I don't know if others are seeing it.
Okay, let's see. Not sure if
Yes,
I see
I can
it,
still
so-
see it, yes.
I can see your screen.
Visible in California.
Likewise, I can see you.
Okay, good. So yes, and so if it's a good lens, which most of these are, they give you the ability to rotate so that you can do verticals, horizontals. The latest versions of all the Canon ones are great in all that category. With Nikon, I believe they are limited on their 24 and their 45. I believe their 85 gives them kind of a multitude of options for turning it around. I'm not so sure about the 17. I forget that one off the top of my head.
Great, thanks, John. Also, Eddie would like to know if using manual exposure is the same as setting your camera on the auto exposure lock to get constant settings.
With tilt shift lenses, I'd recommend manual exposure because what happens is when you start tilting the lens, it's letting in a different amount of light, and the auto exposure systems can really throw you off. And so I would just steer shy of pretty much all the auto exposure options. And if you are with a DSLR, use the live view. It's very good for previewing what the exposure is going to be.
Next up, we've got some questions on lens babies. So Lorraine was saying that the lens baby composer plus an optic stopped all the way down to will give you a sharp maximum focus. Is that the same as just rotating the tilt shift lens?
Lens babies are a lot of fun. They're interesting little lenses, but they are in no way a tilt shift lens. Lens babies, if you're not familiar with them, what they do is that they're relatively inexpensive lenses that allow you to have an area of in focus in a particular area, and you can move that area around the frame. And they do so by being able to tilt the lens. And you're not going to be able to do like the landscape shots that I was showing you, where you get things in the foreground to the background in focus. That's not how they work. They achieve a similar look as one of the things that you can do in tilt shift lenses. So one of the things that I did not explain to you is you can do a reverse tilt so that there's just this narrow little area in focus and everything else is blown out of focus. Tilt shift lenses allow you to do that on a much, much lower budget, about a 1/10 budget, but it doesn't allow you to do the other things, especially what I explained here.
Going back to the focus bracketing, if we could, should focus brackets be processed before stacking or after stacking, or a combination?
I think they should probably be mostly done beforehand. And so you get all your color and contrast adjustments. Framing, you want to leave that a little loose because there's going to be a little bit of slippage, you might say, with focus breathing in there. So that you'll need to fine tune later on.
I might hand it back over to Vicky.
Okay, thank you, Michelle, very much for monitoring the questions. John, I was wondering if you would like to talk a little bit about what's going to happen on February 9th for our part 2.
All right. So for February 9th, I am hoping that a whole bunch of you are going to go out and shoot photos using one of the 4 techniques that I've talked about today. You all don't need to go out and buy tilt shift lenses to do this. But if somebody wants to go out and rent one, that's a great way to experiment and see what they can do. Use one of the 4 techniques in any photo that you want and show us what you got, and we'll see what we can learn from what everybody else does.
Thank you, John. Doug, do you want to speak to how they're going to submit those?
Okay, so when you registered, we captured your email address. So what I will be doing is in the next day or two, well, first of all, make sure that you have registered for part 2 if you want to participate in the image critique. Because as you remember, if hopefully you remember from all the flyers that went out, that we gave you 2 links, one for today's webinar, one for the image critique. So make sure you're registered for the image critique. Then what I will do in the next couple of days, I will send an email to everybody who registered for part 2 with the information about how to upload the images. And basically what will happen is that I will invite you to submit to your images to a Dropbox account. You don't need to have Dropbox to do it. You'll just receive a link. And as several people have asked about the recording, again, the recording will be posted on the N4C YouTube channel. And I will send a link to everybody who registered for part 1, but you can also go to our YouTube channel using the link that's in the screen. Any questions? I see that someone asked, can we attend part 2 without submitting? Yes, you certainly can attend part 2 and hear the critiques on the other people's images, but you get the most value, of course, if you submit your own images. With the number of people who are registered, we might have to say, let's start out with just 1 image per person. And depending on how many people submit, we might be able to open it up further.
John, when would you like to have things submitted by so you have time to look at them?
Oh, I'm quick. I can just view them the day of.
We'll probably set a deadline of a day or 2 before the scheduled meeting.
That would be good, probably.
Yeah. And if I don't know if you've noticed or not, but in the chat, Michelle has posted links to John's website and access to his classes and books, and you can sign up for a free newsletter from him.
Hey, Vicki, I could, if I could just let people know a little bit more about the stuff that's available.
Sure.
So for those that don't know, I do have a monthly newsletter. You can go to my website and sign up for that. And there's a new article each month, and there's an announcement about new classes and other things that are going on. I do have a couple of books available if you're old school and like to have that paper copy in front of you. So more about the focus that we talked about today, and then another one on exposure as well. I do make a lot of different classes, and I am happy to make the public announcement right here and right now about the newest class, which is called Photography Essentials, which is a core photography class. It's not really a beginner class, but yeah, beginners would be great to take this class. And this is really going to focus in on the important elements. And I've got some things in here that I've not presented in any other class. And so being one of my essentials classes, we don't waste a lot of time. It's a concise class. It hits home on all the heavy points that you're going to be using in all your other photography. I do also have a nice composition class and that tilt shift class that we talked about. And as many of you know, I do make classes on all the latest, greatest cameras. And I have many more classes. There's a lot of very hot cameras out now, and I will be making classes in many of those. And so if you want to learn how to use your camera, I do make these very, very, very in-depth tutorials. They're usually 7 to 8 hours, and they will let you know how everything works on your particular camera. And if you are in the market for a new camera, I do have a free buyer's guide. As many of you know, I don't do reviews, and so I don't review each camera. I really don't care which camera is better than the other one, but I do want to help people find the right camera for what they want to do. And so if you want to see a completely unbiased overview of the photography market, You can get the 2022 Camera Buyer's Guide. That's out and it's all up to date because we've got lots of new cameras coming out and they're all accounted for in this buyer's guide. So all of this can be found at my website, as well as the ability to sign up to the newsletter. And so that's my little plug for the end of the show.
Thank you so much, John. I think we all took a lot of info in today, and I'm excited to go out and try a couple things now and hope to send you something for the review. So I think we're getting a whole lot of thank yous in the chat room. Yeah, great presentation. Thank you so much. Anything else you'd like to add?
Nope. Thanks a lot for everybody tuning in. I know there's a lot of people from your club. I think I had a few people from kind of my group of people, and we had a big group here, and that was great to have. So thanks a lot, everybody, for taking time out. Appreciate you being here.
Okay.
Thank you,
Michelle?
John.
Yep. Yeah, I was going to ask you if you had anything else, Doug.
Nope, nothing else from me. Just thanks to everybody to attending. I hope you see you at future webinars.